Hi, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt. What happens in death and after death are common questions in religion. When our time on earth is up, religion can help us cope with spiritual issues surrounding the end of life. We will be discussing some of these questions on this edition of Religion and Life. Helping us make sense of this are our guests, Chaplain Melanie Childers from the Watauga Medical Center, Chaplain Dilbert Minner of Caldwell Hospice and Palliative Care, and Rabbi Stephen Roberts from the Temple of the High Country. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
When one approaches the end of one's life, tremendous effort is put forth by medical teams to provide palliative care, physical care, and so forth. But it seems to me that the end of life is not only a physical issue, but a spiritual crisis as well. It's a spiritual passage. And like other passages in life, religion can help us cope with and come to grips with the meaning of these passages. So perhaps you can help me understand your roles as caregivers in dealing with the spiritual issues surrounding the end of life. Chaplain Childers, you do this all the time at the hospital. What's it like to be there with families and with patients as they approach the end of life and have undoubtedly spiritual issues and questions in mind?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is that it's really a sacred opportunity to be present with folks through this very intimate journey of getting to the final stages of their life and then crossing over to what is beyond. And as you said, that is a spiritual passage. For some people, it is a crisis. For others, it is a very peaceful and natural kind of occurrence. But I do feel like it is a sacred honor and privilege to walk with folks through that time. And as the one person among 1,400 employees who is there kind of representing that sacred and that spiritual aspect of it, I appreciate that the hospital recognizes the need for that amid all of the physiological assessments and interventions that are done, and then the palliative care that is provided, that I'm alongside them providing spiritual assessment, crisis intervention, and then at times bereavement care in the immediate aftermath of a death.
And I saw both of our guests agreeing with you when you were describing this end-of-life passage, as a spiritual passage, and both of you have had tremendous experience in working with both Chaplain Childers and in other instances as well. Could maybe briefly describe, Chaplain, how the hospice organization comes in both in the hospital setting and in the home setting to help patients who have terminal illnesses deal with the spiritual aspects of their disease?
In our particular organization, and as part of our philosophy, as you mentioned, we serve wherever the patient calls home. And so whether that's at the hospital, assisted living facility, nursing facility, home, or other location, that's where we go. And as a part of our philosophy, we believe that a person is body, emotion, and spirit. And so we work as an interdisciplinary team, medical social workers and myself as a chaplain and the physician and the nurse, to provide a holistic type of care. And in our organization and in our hospice and palliative care business, the journey toward death can actually begin long before they are terminally ill. In fact, in our palliative care program, we began providing education long before they become a hospice patient. And so meeting some of those spiritual needs about the questions of why, the existential questions of why is this happening to me, why now, what if, a lot of those different types of questions began long before the actual time. And so coming alongside of them, our philosophy is as a companion for the journey. Not acting like we know it all or have figured it all out, but just coming along and joining them where they're at. Kind of like what Melanie said, it's an intimate moment of coming alongside of them, and I like to think of as being an intimate stranger in my particular type of ministry.
Intimate stranger, that's a nice phrase.
Yeah.
Now, Rabbi Roberts, you've written a book, a textbook, entitled Professional, Spiritual, and Pastoral Care. So obviously you've been working in this field as an expert for quite some time, and I've noticed you agreeing with the assessment of your colleagues here, and you three actually work together, I think, quite intimately. So we've got kind of secular and Christian and Jewish perspectives working together with patients.
I think what we all do as trained healthcare providers, and in our field of chaplains, there are about 10,000 professional healthcare chaplains. What we as professionals do, separate and apart from what the larger clergy community does, we're really trained on those moments around illness to help people specifically make meaning of the situation in which they find themselves. Mm-hmm. Then we assess their spiritual toolbox to say what's in that spiritual toolbox to help them really to get through the moments and hours and weeks in which they are, and to then have conversations on issues of God, of the range of spiritual issues that come up around illness and death, whether it's forgiveness, whether it's joy, whether it's blessing, whether it's fear. And then often we help them go into that spiritual toolbox and find the spiritual tools that our congregational brothers and sisters have helped them to gather along the way and use at these moments.
And I would imagine that dealing with the person who is facing death would be challenging enough. But that's not the only variable in most cases, right? Because you have a team of physicians, you have teams of caregivers, you have family members, some who may be very close to the person, some who may be estranged. So could you talk about maybe some of the challenges that all of you deal with in situations like this? Do physicians, for example, ever get in the way, or do family members create unnecessary drama or issues that impede your work really in dealing with patients? And I imagine the answer is yes, but
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing is lots of times is family dynamics, things that are going on. Whenever you've got a crisis developing, anxiety builds, and anxiety spreads like wildfire sometimes. And if one person is anxious, then usually another family member gets anxious. And a family in general know each other so well, they know how to push everybody's triggers. And when it comes time for a crisis of pending death, the anxiety is just off the chart. And so a lot of our role is coming alongside of them again, understanding the family dynamics as we build up a relationship with them, knowing how to kind of bring a presence of calm into that situation so that the emotional processes that they're dealing with already can work a little bit more smoothly.
And my experience has been that these kinds of life and death moments tend to bring out the best and the worst in who we are. And so, it's kind of a wild card. You never know how a family might respond, and it really might bring out the very best in their ability to provide support to each other and to work through the challenges that they're facing, and then sometimes it just kind of all falls apart. But one of our mantras is to, as Dilbert said, be that non-anxious presence in the midst of whatever's going on there.
Well, and it seems to me that maybe this is our culture, but we're unprepared to deal with death in the way we're prepared to deal with other life passages. And religion perhaps plays a role here. I mean, most of both Christian and Jewish traditions have various rituals surrounding various life passages at birth and at coming of age and marriage. But religion doesn't always do a very good job, it seems to me, in preparing us with how to deal with this passage. Maybe it teaches us about what comes next after the passage is done. Not every religion, but some. But is that your sense? Does religion do an adequate job in preparing us for this final passage, or is there work to be done there?
So I do think that religion prepares many of us really well around issues around end of life. But now we're getting into a society in which less and less people have a solid foundation in religion. And so that's one area where people may not have the religious and spiritual training to look at issues of death. A question that I often ask a range of people is, what do you believe about death and dying, and what were you taught about death and dying? And that then often begins to help me work with the families, with the patients, and with the staff to better understand their own concerns, their own foundations, and to let them really guide the meaning making. When I find somebody who says, I wasn't really taught anything, then we do sometimes run into troubles as they're trying to make sense of where they are. So those are some of the questions I think all of us as professional chaplains do use on a regular basis. What were you taught from your faith? Where are you today in your faith? How does that help you? Are there conflicts? And if there are conflicts, how do we work with them? And if there are no conflicts, how do we bring that in to support you at this moment in your life?
And I would imagine, too, there might be conflicts between the person's beliefs and other close family members or friends and their beliefs, and you have to negotiate that, I would suspect. Do you come upon situations, for example, where family members or friends might be very concerned for the dying person's place in eternity, for example, and Christianity teaches there is an afterlife, for example, and I know some people might be concerned with the state of the person's soul. Is that something that arises in these family dynamics as you work with folks?
I've had that a number of times when the individual who is dying has found his or her own way toward peace and reconciliation in that process, but one or more of the family members is so consumed with a particular view of salvation requirements that this person may or may not have met, that the family is really unable to move forward in their grief process and in the necessary saying goodbyes that really help grief to be a healthy experience. So that is a problem many times.
So in this instance, religion can provide the foundation for dealing with this passage, can provide great comfort, but at least in the instance you're describing, it provides anxious moments, troublesome moments from the perspective of perhaps people around the person who's facing the end of life.
It goes back to what we were talking about, making meaning of death and of life, where sometimes the person dying has come to that moment of meaning in their life and relishes their life and are able to really look at their death. Others may not yet be at a point of being able to make meaning from their own religious perspective, and that's not uncommon. Grief, there's many components to it, and sometimes, however we understand God, higher power, creator, we're in a wrestling around death with God about life and afterlife, and it often comes out when we ourselves are not grounded. So that's often what we see, is that somebody may not be willing to let go and let God at that moment.
And I'll add two things. I've even had situations where the minister themselves have been part of the problem. In one situation, in many situations, where the person may be estranged from the church for whatever reason, and there's some harboring feelings toward the church or toward the particular minister for whatever they may be, right or wrong. And the second is in some of those crisis situations, again, sometimes ministers will come in, and a person may be resigned that they are at peace in their situation, but then the minister may even stir up some of those anxieties because of their theological understanding or lack thereof, and create issues. I remember when I was at Wake Forest Baptist Hospital during my resident CPE, I was so excited that I was going to be able to get to minister possibly to some Muslim patients. Having done a tour of Iraq, I had gained a much bigger world view of the Islamic population and some of the wonderful caring people that I dealt with, and it just so happened that I got to serve one, and I was so excited to be able to go up and tell the person, hey, I can get your imam here if you would like to have him. I know him personally, I can get him. No, I'm fine. And whereas a lot of times I find in the Christian faith, we've always got to have our minister there. We've got to have them there as if they're going to come in and rescue and save the day.
Right.
But I've also found that, interestingly, in the Christian faith, there seems to be more anxiety about death and dying than in the Jewish faith and in the Muslim faith. And I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you notice, you've noticed that as well? So
Yes, yes. And I guess one thing that was going through my mind when you were talking was that, you know, religion is not intended to be a static kind of experience. I mean, it evolves over the course of our lives, and it's okay for us to grow and change and alter our beliefs. But I think some of us feel like that's not okay, or we've maybe been taught that that's not okay. And so when it happens and we run up against a crisis where our previous belief system or worldview no longer is serving us, then you know, we need to reevaluate that. And people need a safe space where they can do that without feeling like, you know, they have abandoned God or abandoned their religion in the process.
That's really kind of a fascinating observation. And Rabbi Roberts, I'd like to hear your perspective from the other side. From the Jewish perspective, do you find that Christians experience more anxiety over issues of death than perhaps Jewish folk that you work with? Is there something foundational in the theology or faith?
I wouldn't say it's about death. I would say it's more about the fear of the afterlife. I have not, in my experience, really experienced a great deal of difference about the fear of death itself and the death experience. There is different theologies about what happens after you die. We are all theistic religions. We've all worked with people out of the non-theistics who may be Buddhist, maybe Hindu. They have another way of looking at the world than I do about what happens after somebody dies. So there's a lot more variation about what do I believe after I'm dead. But the issue of the dying issue, I think people experience the dying issue fairly similar. Am I going to be in pain? You know, is my family going to miss me? Have I made forgiveness with everyone that I need to make forgiveness with? Have I made amends? Are there people that I missed the mark with that I potentially have the opportunity now to make amends with? And that's fairly common, whether somebody's Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim. The other issues about after death, then we do really see a large range about how people react to that.
And you mentioned afterlife and various thoughts about that. Is there a particular, and this is probably an oversimplification, but is there a particular Jewish belief about afterlife that would differentiate Judaism from a Christian perspective? And you're working in a predominantly Christian area, so even when you're working with people of Jewish faith, I'm sure that you interact with Christian beliefs about the afterlife. So how would you differentiate, you know, briefly, without getting into a real sophisticated theological discussion, between a Jewish belief in the afterlife and a Christian belief in the afterlife?
As somebody who grew up in the Deep South, somebody who as a young man spent my summers in Boone, having gone to Tweetsie Railroad as, you know, as a very young man, and Land of Oz, I am used to these questions. And I've often asked about that. In a sentence or two, Judaism believes in an afterlife, period. But then we say our focus is on how we can connect with God here and now. We spend very little time focused on the afterlife. We turn that over to God. But as God's partners here and today, our focus is on how to be in right relationship with God today.
I see.
Which, in contrast, many of the Christian traditions focus on kind of putting everything off to the afterlife, and everything that we do in this world is preparation for that next world. So, yeah.
Well, I've heard all three of you talk about ministering or serving people who are facing the end of life as a kind of holistic enterprise. So you're integrating the person's needs physically, spiritually, emotionally, in a community of family and friends. I'm wondering if you're working with a lot of physicians, do they ever see, are physicians open to this holistic approach, or do they ever see what you're doing as an impediment in any way, and so that you're so solely focused on the physical aspects that there's not room for the holistic approach, or both, perhaps.
My experience is that physicians are all too happy to kind of turn things over to us at that point when there's not a lot more medical interventions that can be provided, because they have been taught to fix problems. And if there are no more problems to fix, then they kind of see, okay, that's somebody else's realm at this point. So you all may
was there any room to involve the physician at that point?
Sometimes,
instead
yes.
of wanting to turn it over, could the physician be further involved to create this kind of extension of holistic care? And maybe the physician's job is done at that point.
I think that's very individual, based on the physician's own kind of belief system and their openness to looking at kind of the more holistic picture. I've had some opportunities to work with physicians in that regard, but others are just, it's uncomfortable for some to kind of go there.
And kind of that's where hospice and palliative care becomes involved, because our medical director can work with either the referring hospital doctor or the local community referring doctor as kind of a transition or handoff to our medical directors. And so that's kind of how it kind of meshes in with that. However, and there are some doctors, especially, that will continue to treat, and again, that's their worldview of how they feel like they have to do that, and sometimes that's an ethical question as well. Sometimes
Part of what, when we work with physicians, is help them better understand what treatment of body, mind, and spirit is. And that often, when somebody goes into palliative care of any sort, we're still treating them body, mind, and spirit. We're just treating them in different modalities. And that's often where we help the physicians begin to understand that when they try one regimen that may not work, there's still their involvement in places is to be there. What patients in particularly feel is abandonment by their physicians if they hand them off to others and don't walk with them. So you asked about what a physician can do spiritually, is walk with the patient beyond their own active care, so the patient and their family do not feel that the physician abandoned them. Similarly, we never want someone to feel abandoned by God. And so we work very hard with the staff and the larger community on issues of things like abandonment and what that may feel like. So physicians can and do play a role still in spiritual treatment of the patients.
That's a really wonderful point. In preparation for this, I was reading about some interesting therapies that various people are using in dealing with end-of-life issues: music therapy, art therapy, and then one that we were talking about earlier, canine therapy. Could you say a word about that? What's going on when art, music, dogs are brought into this kind of holistic treatment of folks who might be facing end-of-life issues?
Well, I'll jump in since I've been involved with canine therapy. I was at a major teaching hospital in New York and was involved in helping bring in dog therapy. What those different modalities help at end of life is opening up somebody through different ways of communications to make meaning and to feel comfortable to talking with those around them. A pet often allows somebody to begin to talk unconsciously or to relax so they can speak with their family. Music therapy, often we allow somebody to pick the music, and then through the music they pick, they're able to talk to their family about the specific music that they've picked and what it means to them. So it's very effective in helping people, patients and their families, connect religiously, spiritually, emotionally, on a much deeper level.
music speaks to the soul, I think, like words can't. I utilize music through MP3 player, even sing to my patients, and it's amazing how even with patients who have dementia can remember some of the old hymns or something like that, that they, when they really can't communicate anymore or interact as much. We have a Pet Peace of Mind program where if a hospice patient is not able to afford their food or things for their animal, we have a collaboration with a pet program that allows them to come in and take care of that pet. So yeah, we also have pets come into our hospice unit and utilize pet therapy.
And I think the connection that these modalities offer is also the best of what religion provides, is a sense of community for folks so that you're not alone even though it is a solitary journey making that final transition, you're not alone in that. You're surrounded by community.
And that's part of the holistic approach that religion can help to foster
Yes.
and bring into place. Well, I must say that you have challenging jobs, and I admire what each of you are doing, the work that you're doing. And I thank you for that, and I thank you for being with us today. This has been very informative and enlightening. That's our program, and if you have any questions or comments, visit watchapptv.com. I'm Ozzie Ostwalt. See you next time on Religion and Life. That was very good.